Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Rational Stad podcast. I'm your host, Nicholas Woode-Smith, and I am joined by the stalwarts Zakhele Mthembu and Ayanda Zulu. Today, we're going to be discussing the main news of the day in South Africa, which I think you'll probably guess what we're going to be discussing, which is John Steenhuisen, leader of the Democratic Alliance, deciding not to run for a third term. So this came as a big surprise to some, not so much of a surprise to others. As we'll be discussing in this episode, there's been a lot of media speculation about the reasons. There's been already people are discussing the race, who's going to be the next leader of the DA. And so we're going to get start talking about a little bit of our opinions about this, talking mainly about what's the real reason why John Steenhuisen's not running. We're going to be talking about, was he a good leader? Was he not a good leader? Or has he left the DA better than when he arrived? We're going to be talking about who's going to be replacing him, the implications for the GNU, and also maybe a little bit of a fun prediction of what the election is going to look like at the end of the year and the next national elections as well. Starting with you, Ayanda, let's just start with this. Is that, do you think, so Steenhuisen has stated that he hasn't been pressured out of the party. He's saying this was his decision and that it and has nothing to do with internal party leadership or people bullying him out over perhaps an Uber Eats bill. But what do you think? Is he telling the truth, or is he just saving face?
Thank you very much for that introduction, Nicholas. Very colorful introduction, I must add, from you there. But as you've correctly noted, he will not be seeking re-election for a third term as federal leader. And naturally, over the past few days, or rather over the past week, there's been a lot of speculation, right, in the media regarding the reason or the reasons that sort of informed his decision not to seek re-election. So some people have argued that the foot and mouth disease outbreak, his handling of that could have been a factor. In the sense that there are people within the organization, or rather there's a constituency within the organization that feels that he hasn't handled it with the urgency that it deserves, and that he may have alienated that constituency within the organization, which is in fact the farming community itself, which is being directly affected by the foot and mouth disease outbreak. So there's that view which I've seen in the media from some people. But then there's also the other view, which speaks to the DA, it being in the GNU, and how there's a sense from some people that the party hasn't really performed up to their standards, or hasn't really been an effective opposition within the context of the GNU. There's sort of some kind of dissatisfaction with how the party has performed, and there's a sense that it hasn't been pushing back enough, against the ANC. I don't personally agree with that view, but I'm just saying that I've also seen it, in the media over the past few days. I have a very different sort of view on this entire thing, and that isn't to say that the FMD outbreak or the DA's performance in the GNU could not have been contributing factors. But I think this really takes us back to the whole financial debacle, right, which involves Dion George, who resigned from the organization not too long ago, right? He was the party's former federal finance chair, right? And at some point early last year, he revoked, right, the party's credit card, citing that John, right, has sort of been using the party's credit card to take care of his own personal expenses, and so forth. So it takes us back to that entire thing, right? There was an internal investigation which found that there was no financial wrongdoing or impropriety on John's side, really. But I think my argument here is that I think that has been the main contributing factor, in the sense that in South Africa, right, all political parties, be it the ANC, be it the IFP, and many others, I feel like there are sort of unwritten rules that they have to adhere by, right, in order to retain their key constituencies. So, for example, with the ANC, I would argue that those guys can't really turn their backs on BEE, affirmative action, or things of the like, whether they like it or not, right? Those things are very central to the support that they receive as an organization. In a similar vein, the IFP, for instance, can't be seen to be, undermining the role of the Zulu monarchy or weakening the role of the Zulu monarchy. So in this case with the DA, for years, it has positioned itself as this clean organization, so to speak. We aren't corrupt. We aren't like the other organizations out there. Financially, we can handle our own affairs. And now this comes out into the media that your leader, could have sort of abused the resources of the organization for his own expenses or for his own things. I think that does harm the organization. And I say that because this is something I spoke to Zex about the other day in the office, and he never said this directly, but he alluded to it, that in politics, perception matters more than truth, unfortunately. So even though the Federal Legal Commission found no wrongdoing, it's important to mention this, that they investigated, they found no wrongdoing. But I think because this has come out into the media and everyone has heard about it, right? There's the whole Uber Eats thing. He was using the party's money to buy things for himself. I think some level of damage has been done just in terms of image-wise and credibility-wise. So I would argue that maybe in that sense, there were people within the organization who felt that he has become a sort of liability to us, and that we can no longer afford to have him, sort of around, leading in everything. Because the FMD thing, it's been with us for more than a year now. But in as far as John's leadership is concerned and how he has handled it, I would argue that it's a fairly recent thing. Just 6 months ago, to me, it appeared that John's position in the party was well established. I didn't get the sense that, someone wanted him out of the organization, or there would be someone who sort of challenges him for the leadership race. He was well established. But ever since that entire sort of financial thing came up, I think it did injure him to some degree. And my argument, even though I don't have any evidence to support this, my argument would be that those people who felt that this financial debacle, which came out into the media, injured the party's credibility, may have applied some pressure on him to step down and not seek re-election. I do agree with the view that there may have been some level of pressure applied on him. Just like Musi Maimane back in 2019, after the elections, I feel like there was some pressure applied on him to step down as leader after they saw the results of the party. So really, my point is, even though the FMD outbreak and maybe the party's performance in the GNU could have been factors, I think the main contributing factor here was the entire financial debacle. The party internally feels that he may have become a liability, or he has become a liability, largely because of that, and because the party wants to maintain this image of itself, right? So even if, as I've said, there was no wrongdoing found, the perception that the public has is that, this is a guy who misused the resources of the organization for his own personal things. I think that's what really informed that they were like to him, maybe you need to consider this now that this has happened. Those are just my initial thoughts around this. I think we'll touch on the other things, of course, as we go on.
I think you definitely have the right idea here. I actually didn't think about it before now, but I definitely that you're completely correct. The DA has spent most of its time trying to create this idea that it's not corrupt and it's good at service delivery. And those are the two brand points which Steenhuisen are failing on right now. And regardless of, as you said, regardless of the truth, perception matters. But I will say that it's actually, in a way, makes me feel a little bit good about the DA. And I know that's weird, like that we're actually being positive about the DA in a sense on this part. It's very weird that I, as DA voter, will be positive about the DA. but that the fact that they are so intolerant of internal corruption that even when the person's found not corrupt, they'll actually pressure them out. Because I think that what we're all getting at here is that they're doing damage control, but they probably pressured him out, even if it was just, you need to step aside, Johnny boy. Zakes, do you think we've got we're on the right track here?
Hey, yeah, like I kind of like, I'm boxed in now, since Makeba was like, hey, he had some great insight from me, and then he expanded on it and applied it all cool. I'm like, yeah, cool. I'm a smart guy, aren't I? I do it. Remember what we were even talking about. But yeah, shout out. I talk about perception and truth. But man, the DA is very interesting. To your point, Nicholas, right? Like it is like you can see there's drama. You usually don't find a whole lot of stories like this in the DA. But I was talking to someone on the internet making a comment that like even when they are in the dumps, right, they it isn't as perceived, like they are still so concerned about the perception and how they are seen in the public that like I also agree with what Makeba just said, in the sense that I think, and you too, I think he was pushed out. Like I don't think it was a hey, I'm no longer running, but I think the entire public perception around him, especially even among DA voters, right? When your own constituency starts looking at you like, ah man, this guy's the worst, then like your time in politics is pretty much up. And the foot and mouth thing did not help. And to Makawa's point, it had the potential of alienating a very important constituency to the DA, one that already Freedom Fund Plus was like, moving into the DA's territory. So like the fact that he waited, like it's a further indictment, right? That we've had foot and mouth disease for so long, and there hasn't been a proper response to it. It just reflects so badly on him. It reflects extremely badly, not only on him, on like the DA too, and the entire thing on the DA gets things done. And we're like, man, you had 2 years to get things done, at least a year and a half, and you have not gotten things done. So yeah, the perception of that is pretty horrible. But the handling of it is pretty interesting, right? Because he was stepping down, even gave, pretty much it seems like a farewell tour. This will be his farewell tour, at least his continued serving in the GNU. I'm like, well, that's cool, Like in other places, the moment you say you're no longer running, it's kind of like time's up, make way for whomever it is. But it was pretty cool in that regard. But what is not pretty cool, I think Makeba made a great point, right? Like his insights on things that you cannot afford to lose, things you cannot afford to renege on, or to be seen at the very least to renege on. Like it was the DA's one is being the party of clean governance. That is their entire thing, and they do respond. And every time I read about instances of corruption or anything, I do like there are consequences, but when your party leader is the one who's seen as misusing party funds, right? Like this is something that yeah, you can't, the stain of it cannot leave you as easily, even if you can tell people that no, I was found not guilty, when the head of finance in your party is like, no, this guy steals money from the party, and he is a bad financial manager. And I think John's entire response, right, to it, to me, was weird, because I remember when the story first broke about him having an order, an order for, I think, insolvency in the Western Cape High Court, because he couldn't pay some credit card debt of it. And I was like, when he was asked for comment, he was like, nah, is there any evidence that he used state funds to finance that credit card? And like, it's actually a good thing. If he can't pay, it means that he's not using state money to finance himself. I'm like, but I don't think you understand the problem. The problem is that you're a bad financial manager, and you are in a position where you handle finances for the state. So like this perception that you cannot even pay off credit card debt, right? That is a problem. You have to address that. But he did not want to address that. And then it further comes out that he's also misusing the party credit card, not only his personal one, but the party one. So like it is a series, like it is, we can confidently say he's bad at handling money, which is not something you want to say about the leader of your party if your party wants to be in government, where you handle a whole lot of money, right? Like, so the perception, it was too bad for John. Like in the upcoming elections after the local one, really. But even the local ones, right? Your national leadership matters in South Africa because we have a very weird way in which we vote in local government elections, where even though service delivery should be the dominating, topic, it usually is not. It usually is number two. It is about how your national leadership acts, how it is constituted, and things like that. So maybe it may have an effect, but for the national elections, it was going to be unviable to continue having him as party leader, right? Like for all the problems that I've mentioned. He's perceived as being incompetent with the foot and mouth disease entire debacle, and is also perceived as being financially irresponsible, which are bad things you want to have, especially for a party like the DA, to Ayanda's point, because, well, the DA are supposed to be the party that is good, that is clean, that gets things done. So their leader being like this does not necessarily help. So I think it worked out for all parties involved. I doubt John would have, wanted to be subject to further public scrutiny going forward, because it was only gonna get worse. His tenure in the Department of Agriculture, one can say, hasn't been the greatest. And even if it is the greatest, and even if he can come up with metrics and it's like, look, I improved on this and this, but it's like the perception. And the perception of it is already tainted. People already see him as a failure at the very least in, handling the entire department. So that is not something that the DA wants to associate itself with. That's so heartbreaking about politics, isn't it? Like, they will take you and use you, in the moment you are no longer viable. They're like, hey, so you will slowly go into the sunlight, to the sunset, that is, and we'll all go our separate ways. So I think it is that. So it is understandable from my part. He was just unviable as the face of a party of clean governance.
I think especially on that, I'm glad you ended on that point, Zex, because I actually wanted to interject, but then this means I didn't have to. Is that I think that it's actually the DA is definitely a victim of its own standards and branding, because it's very anti-corruption, it's very anti-incompetence, but that means that people are going to be honing in on that, and the media especially hones in on that we know that there's ANC and EFF politicians spending like 30,000 rands of taxpayers' money on just whiskey at strip clubs, but people that doesn't even make the news. It'll be like some citizen journalist mentioning on Twitter, that'd be the highest. Yet John Steenhuisen managing his own personal wealth badly makes headline news. And I think that as much as I do agree with you, I judge financial illiteracy, I feel very bad about, because I think most of this country were not given opportunity to learn financial literacy, and it's very sad because we basically have to rely on the luck of the draw of having a parent who's going to teach it to us, because schools don't teach it. But I think the thing that separates John and the DA from the ANC and other corrupt politicians is that they're being irresponsible with our money. He's just being irresponsible with his money. Now, that's assuming I didn't actually follow the Uber scandal. So, Ayanda, you mentioned that it was found that there was no actual problems. He settled everything. And that actually represents a problem, because all I saw from the media was there was a problem. I did not see any reporting on that he was found innocent, which just shows how biased the media has been against the DA, which we know kind of why that happens. Independent media is owned by Iqbal Survey, who's an ANC stalwart. He's an ANC insider. But I don't understand why, like, Media 24 does it. Media 24 used to be at least vaguely either non-partisan or kind of acknowledging the ANC is around the country into the ground. Maybe we should back the lesser evil. But now they just they report only on the DA screwing up, and they kind of whitewash a lot of what the ANC does, or just not report it at all, or they will report it and then they just cram it down. It's very easy to hide information when you are publishing 100 articles a day, and then you only choose to feature some of them.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Nicholas, to interject. Like, you make a great point, right? And I was seeing this as I was looking at comments, or was it on Facebook, right? And comment on this John Steenhuisen no longer being leader. And it is a very interesting dynamic in that a lot of South African middle class voters, ideal demographic for the DA, right? Middle class of whatever race too. They, given the nature of the digital age, we are connected to so much of what happens in America that like we also kind of inherit all of these divisions and splits, right, between the right and the left. And I'm like, in South Africa, we don't have at least a right and left that looks like how it looks in America. If we had a left that was how it is in America, and I doubt we would be as concerned about our prospects, right? So the thing is though, in South Africa, when a lot of these people adopted, especially with Trump, right? Trump made it so that firstly, right, he said something the South African media blatantly disagreed with him on, and Trump still insisted on saying no. This is what I believe. So him and the media stand in contrast, really, about the entire thing. The South African media seemingly has taken a, wanna say, patriotic stance, which is a very weird thing, right? Especially with this Trump thing, they seemingly think that if you were to acknowledge any of the truths that Trump may voice about the ANC government, you are somehow saying that Trump is right. I'm like, you can hate Trump as a person, you can disagree with, just like I do. Like I find him to be a very despicable person, but we'll get to that soon enough. But even if you find someone to be despicable, you can be like, hey, when they're telling the truth, like, B is a bad policy. Like, at a macro level, it is for an open and free society, at least as a libertarian, what you want, right? Like, that is not a basis for an open and free society in the hierarchical sense, because it does not seek to treat everyone equally, right? But if you hate Trump, then even though in the past you would have said, hey, there are problems with this particular policy, but because this person who you hate is saying it, then it is like, whoa. And then bringing it back to the DA point, right? A lot of middle class people position or think that the DA is positioned to the right, and the right is bad currently, at least in mainstream culture wars. The right is bad. The right is all the reason for everything bad, and the left good, the left progressive. And who are the left? At least the representation thereof, the most palatable representation thereof, would be the ANC, the ruling party. I even saw someone saying that the DA likes nipping at the heels of the ruling party, right? And now that they are unable to do that, maybe they are suffering. And I'm like, man, like, maybe the ruling party needs to have its heels nipped at.
Yeah,
but
that's
that is
literally their
beside the
job.
point. Like, it's there. But like, the point I'm making is that I think some South African, there's certain segment of the South African public, right, especially in the media right now, they've kind of like, went into a lager, to use a South African example, like, created our own lager, and we're like, South Africans here. And if you are on the other side, even if the people who are in this side would disagree with, we will attack you, will not cover you. And the DA, unfortunately, they have used it as a representation of the rights of the people we disagree with. And I think that kind of filters through into how they are covered, because you're right? They are hardly ever positive about it. And when they do make headlines, they are making headlines in a negative sense. But on the other side, people who are like on the left of the South African political spectrum would be like, oh no, but they never write anything bad about the DA. I was literally just arguing with someone who had said that yesterday, who was like, no, but they never, write about white corruption, as he said. I was like, man, I've been reading about Steenhuisen for like over 6 months now, all on the media. And he said this whilst he was posting a screenshot of Newsroom Africa's story covering that exact thing. So yeah, it is very interesting how people perceive how they are covered, at least, or how their side is covered.
People are going to see what they want to see just to confirm their biases. And it's one of those very frustrating things about our job and advocacy. And that's why I think we say a lot of the time that why we're not trying to appeal to the people who've made up their minds. We're trying to appeal to the people in the middle who haven't made up their minds. And hopefully we can convince some other people from the other side, especially because converts are the most fanatical. So guys, if you're listening to this and you're a communist, just come to our side. We'll appreciate you. Also just another point I just want to say, when you're saying that about people saying that they disagree with Trump just instinctively, just because they don't like Trump, even if what he's saying is correct, because I don't like Trump either. I think his domestic policies are horrible. I am terrified that he's trying to implement a monarchy in the US, and which I'll only be fine with if his successor is Marcus Rubius, the new emperor. But there's a quote which I like to say that it goes along the lines of healthy body, healthy mind. Yeah, okay, we can all agree with that. Exercise good, it helps your mental health, whatever. Hitler said that. So are we meant to start, stop exercising now? It's I think we can always say that a stuck clock is right twice a day. I'm going to be throwing all these idioms out here. But I think that's a good spot to move on to the next subtopic, which is how did John Steenhuisen actually do as leader of the DA? And I'm going to throw my 2 cents in here. That I first don't think it's actually a bad thing that he stepped down, but I also don't think he was terrible. I think that I think it's good that he stepped down because I think that he accomplished what he needed to accomplish as leader of the DA. I think that he inherited a really chaotic party that had so I saw something this morning where under Musi Maimane, they hemorrhaged, I think, between like 11 to 17% of their membership. And they still hemorrhaged the membership under Steenhuisen, but it was only like 3%. And so I think that he did stabilize a lot. I think he helped bring the DA back a little bit to its pre-Maimane sense of identity to make them distinct from the ANC. Because I think, a lot of what we've mentioned in the pod a lot is that the DA has a habit of trying to be a blue ANC and trying to be an uncorrupt ANC. And we all, we tend to agree that that's not a good thing. You can't just go on, because the problem with the ANC is more than just corruption and incompetence. It's also bad policy. And I do think that there's been some good things that Steenhuisen has led under his watch, like they have opposed EWC. I know some of their members have been very consistent on that. I think Marston would have a lot to say if he was online right now about that. But I think that, for example, that they took a stand against BE. I think that they've been much less, probably behind closed doors. I get the sense that they're not tolerating people who don't actually belong there. Like, I think we can probably see like our old good friend Pumzile van Dam not really being welcome in the DA anymore, kind of represents that, because she didn't belong in the DA. And I think that making it an unkind place for people who don't belong in it, that's not discrimination. That's not being toxic. That's fine. You don't invite people who want to play checkers to your chess club. And there needs to be a separation, because what's the point of party politics, and what's the point of having a party in the first place after that? But I think John Steenhuisen, so I do think that overall, I think might not be the most charismatic guy. I think that, but I do think the media was quite unfair on him. I think that they've given him an unfair shake from the beginning, saying that, he only has a matric, he's underqualified. I'll point to the fact that the EFF parties that got the highest concentration of degrees of any party, and look what it did to them. If that's what happens, I want people without matrics. I think that will make us even better. I think just go reverse. I think people who only got a primary school education, that's what we need. That will be the best politicians if that's the the trend that we're looking at. But I think that Steenhuisen made the best of a bad situation. And as a lot of people said, he's took them from 16% to 30%. And I think that we should appreciate him for that matter of fact, while also recognizing that it's time for him to step aside, and it's time for a leader who can bring them into their next era. He was the fixer. Now we need the builder. And but I'm interested, Ayanda, I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Do you think I'm being charitable? Do you think I'm being not charitable enough? What did you think of Steenhuisen?
Well, wow, I actually have so many things to say, and I guess I'm the smart one now, right? Zach said he was smart because I piggy-banked on what we spoke about the other day. So I'm going to piggyback on what he's spoken about now, and there's actually 2 points that I want to make before. Well, 3, in fact. The first one, Nicholas, is, this thing about John having only a matric. Do you know why? I can actually take you on that, but I won't take you on here. I can take you on that because the DA was the same party which for years was dragging Zuma in the mud over the education thing, right? They raised the fact that he lacked formal education for years. They were the party raising questions about his competence and everything. So I actually honestly find it hypocritical of them today to turn around and elect a matriculant to the helm. But I won't bash them for that. I'm just pointing it out that it was hypocritical of them to do that to Zuma for years if they claim to value formal education. I can even speak about Natasha Mazzoni, even Dean McPherson. I can bring them in, but that's a side issue. I will leave it for now.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to actually say, that's actually a very good point. I'd actually completely forgotten about that. And that is yet again the DA being a victim of its own branding and being inconsistent. Yeah, go on.
But I'll leave it for now. It's hypocrisy. I'll leave it for now. My second point is on the media thing, right? And this is a very obvious point, but we have to make it. That I'm glad that the media outlets are doing whatever they're doing now and reporting how they're reporting, because what we're beginning to see through is this facade of, media objectivity, right? This idea that there are press outlets in this country which are impartial, which aren't partisan. I think what has become clear to all of us is that that entire idea is not true. It's nonsensical. Humans, by their nature, are biased. I mean, we all have our own biases, and those biases are going to reflect in what we put out in these press outlets, in what we say, and in what we do. And what I like about us here at the Rational Standard, but by extension the Free Market Foundation, is that we have never made any secret about our own biases, right? Our biases for limited government, private property, individual liberty, and free enterprise. Anyone who comes and reads the Rational Standard knows that that is our worldview. And anything we say flows from that worldview. Our reporting, our analysis is anchored in that worldview. So we have never ever said that, we are somehow partisan, impartial, by the way, or we're not taking any sides. We do have a side. On to the third point, which Zakes made about us importing these culture wars from the USA, because that's another thing which I don't like, which I see often, and it's tied to this issue, by the way. We import these culture wars, we import these concepts, and we forget that these concepts have very context-specific meanings, as Zakes has said. A liberal in the US context is very different to what we know as a liberal here in our context in South Africa. And what frustrates me sometimes is when I see this liberal bashing that I see. And in many cases, it's the DA, right? Being bashed by those who call themselves conservatives, who even go as far as saying someone like Jordan Hill Lewis is a socialist. I was actually shocked by this. Was it Willem Betze? I think that's his name. I saw this on X. He was like, GHL is a socialist. I'm like, dude, do you understand how bizarre that sounds? I mean, I get that you may have issues with the guy and, whatever, how he's governing the city of Cape Town. But to call him a socialist, that's an overstretch, right? But this liberal term, right? They like saying things like, liberals are pushing this gay agenda, they're pushing statism, and I'm there like, that's a context-specific term. It has a specific meaning in the US context. That is not how we understand liberalism here in South Africa. How we understand it here is different, and what values it emphasizes here is different, right? But to my point, because we will go back to this later on when we reflect on the DA, right, and Mmusi Maimane and what happened in those years. But on to John himself and measuring how he performed as the leader of the DA. I think for me, it's just two things. It's two things. We first need to understand why was John brought into the leadership in the first place, right? You, Nicholas, have said correctly, right, that after 2019, there were concerns that were raised about the party's performance and how it lost or hemorrhaged some of its voters that form part of its key constituency to the VF Plus, right? And at that point, the DA found itself at crossroads. It had to decide, are we going to continue with a strategy of trying to appeal to a broader sort of constituency, a diverse constituency, or do we try to attract back people from this key constituency that we have lost to the VF Plus? I think those were the kinds of discussions they had internally, right? Because the strategy under Maimane was to say, let's try and build this truly South African party, right? But if you want to do that, of course, there are trade-offs. If you want to expand the party beyond its core base, there are trade-offs. that expansion may alienate some of the core voters, of course. And I think that was the trade-off that Musi himself, even openly, was willing to make, to say, if we want to have a truly South African party, we are going to have to lose some voters. Unfortunately, some people are going to reject this sort of strategy that we have. So I think those were the internal discussions then. They were like, do we attract these voters back, or do we continue with Musi's strategy? And I think, in my view, the decision was to say, let us abandon that strategy and rather pursue these voters that we lost to the VF+. Now, if that is why John was brought in, then I think on that count, he succeeded. At least to some degree, he did succeed. Now, of course, with the whole FMD thing, he may be reversing his own gains, of course. But I think he did succeed. I think if you look at the results for the last national elections, they did grow marginally. It wasn't by too much of a high margin, but they did grow marginally. So one could make the argument that to some degree he succeeded in attracting some of those voters back. On to my second point now, because it deals with his performance in the GNU. And this is where, again, I think we must be fair, right? Because even I, at times, I am critical of them, but this is where perhaps I revert a bit to Zakhele's position, because Zakhele said he's not a supporter of the DA. He doesn't hold a brief for them, but he recognizes their value, because it's important for us to recognize the DA's value in South Africa. I think as much as we criticize it and we say all sorts of things about it, I would argue that, number one, it is the most diverse party in the country. I don't care who says what. It is the most diverse party. Number two, in terms of capability, they are a capable party. They do have very highly capable people within their ranks. Number three, in terms of the quality of governance, I mean, say whatever you want to say, call GHL a socialist, but I would argue that in terms of governance, they tend to perform far better than other organizations. And there are good case studies of this. I mean, the city of Cape Town is one of them, of course. So they play a very important role. I think, of course, there have been people who, you know, as I've said, have criticized John and others who are in government alongside the ANC and other stakeholders. They have said that the party is now drifting leftwards. I've even heard that accusation. The party is drifting leftwards. It's being co-opted and stuff. My view is that they are operating under constraints. So even though we must criticize them, we must be fair on them and at the very least try to realize that they're operating under real constraints and that they can only go so far in pushing back against some of the things that the ANC is doing. So, for example, with the Bella Act, which is now an act, as far as I'm concerned, they are still challenging that in court, right? And I think there are other bills as well that they are challenging in court, and I think they should be given credit for that. The mere fact that they are trying to push against some of these policies means they must be given credit. Not to say you mustn't criticize them, but give them credit. And my worry is that some of the discourse around this goes too far and it begins to suggest things which, in my view, are not true. But back to my point, if you accept the view that John and them have shifted leftwards, they're now embracing socialism, as others have said, then you're going to argue naturally that their performance has been cucked, to say quite frankly, in the GNU. But I think if you're coming from my perspective, really, and you're looking at it from where I'm looking at it from, I think they've performed reasonably well. Never mind the other areas you can criticize them on, but they've performed reasonably well, even with the whole VAT thing. That's a major victory, which I still think they deserve credit for. So that's where I'm coming at it from. John, if you measure it by how he came into leadership in terms of attracting that constituency back, I think he succeeded on that count. I think he helped the DA for the first time to enter national government. Never mind the constraints they're working under, never mind the challenges. But for the first time, the DA has stopped shouting on the sidelines. They are now in government, right? Even though their power is limited and all those things. But they're now in government and they now have an opportunity to show people, at least in those ministries they're in, that we can we can get things done. Because this is also important, and Zakes has made this point before, that we criticize them for not having a confidence and supply arrangement. You are like, why did you go into government? But from their view, when they looked at it, they were like, but this is an opportunity for us to actually go into government and show people that we can get things done, right? If you look at Leon Schreiber, for example, at Home Affairs, I personally think he isn't doing a bad job there. I think he's doing a good job. Given the circumstances there, he's doing a good job. Or Sivier Warube at Basic Education, right? They've criticized her over the Bella Act, right? And how she's busy implementing that now. But I think if you look at the whole thing with the bucket toilets and the promise that she made, that by the time I end my term here, I would have removed all bucket toilets across the country. Last time I checked, I think she was around 80 to 90% to achieving that goal. So I think there have been those minor, victories, which I think are important, really, to acknowledge. But to my point, I think, John, if I look at those two things, the DA's performance in the GNU so far, I look at how he led the party and the direction he moved it in. I think post 2019, there has been a bit more ideological clarity, number one. But number two, he has helped the DA to come into national government, and he has been at the center of constituting a government, which I think, given the other options we have, is a far better thing as compared to the so-called, doomsday coalition. So I think he walks away having done very important things for the party. That's my view.
I think I agree with all that. I think that I actually get into a bit of a habit of bashing the DA too much. But, as I say this, I think I just have too high, like Martin, we just have really high standards for them, because it's a really important thing for us to cast our vote. So I expect bad things from the ANC and the EFF. I want the DA to do better. But I think that, and I think you're right, I bash them a little bit too much. But I agree with that. I think they've gotten more ideological clarity. I think that getting into government, even if we might disagree with if they did it the best way, I think maybe they should have been a little bit tougher on the ANC, but it's better than what they were before. And that's the thing. We could say that, we should have got the Allies should have gotten to Berlin in less than a year, but the fact that they were able to get to Paris means that they actually did have gains. And I think that's worth acknowledging. But Zakes, are you as positive as we are about this, or do you think Steenhuisen torpedoed everything?
I wouldn't say I'm positive. I am like meh. It's meh. It is meh. I think to Ayanda's point, to raise a very good analysis, right? And what possibly may have informed John becoming party leader, right? And a very good point on the hypocrisy too of the DA in making him party leader right after they were decrying another opposition party leader for being uneducated. But that is not the point. The point really is we should judge him. Did he manage to get the constituency, which I at least and I think he was meant to at least influence? Yeah, but was it enough to justify him being leader? And then combine that with the fact with his handling, with him having the agriculture department, right? And there being a crisis whereby we have our exports of hooved animals not being able to go out of the country when he is at the crisis started when he was at the helm, still going on and go worse when he was at the helm. So considering the fact that his job, at least we think one of his jobs was to try and get the farming constituency back on board. Did he succeed? I would say it is it canceled itself out, and I'm being generous like that because I think it is I would lean towards maybe made at the very least it made it much more harder to appeal to that constituency, right? And then there's Freedom Fund Plus, which is getting good PR currently. I don't know how, but they are, and it is very interesting to see, right? But I guess people love South Africans love themselves people who are seen to be doing something, right? From like the mayor in Tshwane to the minister of correctional services, things like that. Like when they see that you are doing, I call it the Sufism, right? You may not even be doing something substantively, but you must be seen to be doing something. That matters a lot, and maybe they're suffering from that. But with John May, he also like his leader, his tenure as leader, as I said, to me is like a mayor. Makeba is correct. They are in government, and I love that. I've mentioned all of this. I like, yo, like, yeah, Home Affairs is better. Sure, the Department of Basic Education is better, although still have the same problems with like the central administration system, which of course, is now cemented thanks to Bella and, Siviwe. I don't blame her at the very least for implementing Bella, because it's part of her job, that Act was passed before she came in there. So she kind of has to make regulations for that, right? Which puts them in a very weird position because they generally did oppose Bella. So yeah, the entire thing in and of itself is pretty interesting, right? Because to me, they are good and they are bad. I wouldn't say he's been a bad leader, but I wouldn't say he's been an extremely good leader too. I think to your point, Nicholas, earlier on, you were like, nah, he was the fixer. I think he succeeded in doing that. Succeeded in at least making it clearer that the DA, is a party that stands for these values. And like, if you are too far removed from them, either you will leave or you won't have a very nice time in the party. And I think that was very important, right? Because now, like, it's fine. It created all these splinter, smaller parties that maybe if you feel represented there, you can go there and support them and give them your vote. But I think that was pretty cool. And then most importantly, really what is needed now, to Nicholas' point again, is like someone who will grow like those gains, right? The problem has been fixed. The dam is no longer leaking, and we now need it to be filled up again. And I think that's what should be that's what should be the focus, right? And yeah, I think that will be it. I'm interested. Like the DA doesn't have an exciting, leadership race. Everything is so formal and like prim and proper. I'm used already to like slates, like already being leaked to the media. Everyone is like, nah, it's fine. I'm possibly considering. I saw that Hill Lewis is considering running, but he's like, all prim and proper. I'm like, nah, man, give me slates, give me policy, ideological positions, give me something to work with to feed myself until your national elective conference. But I doubt we'll be getting anything like that.
I think that's a good thing to go on to the next part of the topic, which is who's going to replace Steenhuisen. And that's and I think you already mentioned Jordan Hill Lewis. I think that's very likely he's very likely going to be the guy. But actually, before I go on to that, the topic I want to bring up, and I think there's a comment here that there's a comment here that's actually a good question that maybe we can answer. Can DA ministers at least stall implementation of bad ANC policies if they can't stop them? So I think that we discussed in previous podcasts that the DA is very bad at disobeying the law. They hold themselves up to a really high standard that they need to follow systems, regardless of if that system is actually doing a bad thing or not. And I think that's a big flaw with the DA. Martin says a lot that the DA should be skirting the law a lot when they know it will actually result in their making things better for South African citizens. But the thing I wanted to mention as well is that I think that was a big mistake for Steenhuisen to be a minister as well as being leader of the DA. I know that Jordan Hill Lewis has kind of alluded that if he runs, which I'm pretty sure he's going to run, and if he runs, he's probably going to win. They've been grooming him for this for ages, but he says he also still wants to be mayor of the city of Cape Town. Maybe that he can still do that. I know mayor is kind of a semi-symbolic role. The city manager is actually the person who does everything, and they're an appointed position, not an elected position. And And I know it's kind of almost and I think they're trying to create a little bit of mythology here, because Helen Zille was the person who built the DA to its height. She still has a lot of power, where even people who say, "Oh, she's so racist, but I still like her." That takes a lot of things. She's very much got that reputation in South Africa, where even people who don't like her do kind of like her. But I do think that the ministerial position, I think that we can't really expect someone to run the second largest party in the country while also trying to run an incredibly important ministry during a crisis. I think it's silly. I think that that the DA should separate its main party leadership positions from its jobs that actually require a lot of effort. This will be fine, I think, if Jordan Hill-Lewis stays as mayor, because, as I said, city manager actually does the work. He's a symbolic role. I think he does it well. I think that he's very good at what you were mentioning, Zex, the Sufism of looking like he's doing something. He's very good at being everywhere. He's very good at showing his face at public gatherings, showing his face at openings of places, and making it look like him and the DA are building these things up. Now, I know a lot of people blame him for rates and how our rates are going up. I think that was happening already, and I think that he had a very good takedown of a ground up article where people were trying to propose rent control, and he had a very good. This shows why it's so silly that people saying that he's a socialist, because he literally wrote an article against rent controls and against socialist policies. I like his policy frameworks from what I've seen of it. I don't think he's even a milquetoast liberal. I think he's a proper classical liberal that is quite charismatic. And I think that he will compromise when he needs to compromise, which is important. We're advocates, so we don't have to compromise. We just do whatever we want. But they actually do have to compromise. And I think I'm bullish on Jordan Hill-Lewis. I think that he will be the builder if he gets through there. I think that he will help keep the DA on the straight and narrow. I think that he's got that strength to stand up against people when they're actually disagreeing with him, which I think that Musi struggled with. I think Musi was always trying to build bridges when sometimes you have to know you have to yell at someone when they're actually being wrong. But Jordan Hill-Lewis can do it with class. And I know you don't like the Zex because it might be boring, but I think it will definitely appeal to middle class constituents. But Ayanda, what do you think of Jordan Hill-Lewis, and what do you think about the other people? I know Soli's running. Some people saying that Siviwe Garuba's might run as well, but is it symbolic? Are they actually going to run, or I think, for me personally, my gut is saying that they it's going to be a shoo-in and they're going to push Jordan Hill-Lewis into the position.
Yeah, I honestly think the guy who has been touted as the successor is just Jordan Hill-Lewis. And I saw a tweet of his the other day on X saying he will be able to avail himself if he is nominated. So I do think that he is eyeing the position. I would argue, and I also believe that, and this is just my little weird argument. I also believe that Jordan has sort of been groomed over the years for this position. At some point, he was Helen Zille's chief of staff, I think, when she was still in the Western Cape. So I think this has been a long sort of project over the years. I think at some point they did know that he would occupy a leadership position within the organization. So I think really at this point, even though we have no sort of concrete details, that he is definitely one of the people who are going to be in the race for federal leader of the DA. There's just a minor point here that I wanted to make about him, because and it relates back to what's going on in the Western Cape. And this is something I've also spoken to Zex about before, right? There are people who are calling him a socialist, saying he's a lefty and everything. Then on the other end, there are people saying he's anti-poor, that the DA in the Western Cape is anti-poor. And I'm here like, dude, have you actually went and seen their budget there in that province and how much they're spending on the communities that you're saying they aren't spending on? As we speak right now, I would argue that there is that tension that they're dealing with in that province, in the sense that they want to cater for these poor communities. But there's also this pushback of people saying that if you're going to build social housing in these areas, what about our property? Won't you devalue our property in the process of building that social housing for these people or for those communities? So I'm bringing that up just to show you how far apart the narratives are. But really, to go back and to not digress, I think Jordan Hill-Lewis is really going to be one of the contenders. I don't think Cilliers will, because Cilliers wants to prove himself first in Tshwane. He hasn't finished business there. So he may try to push to compete there against Nasipi. Good luck to him. And then maybe Solly Malatsi and then others. But for now, as it stands, I think it's Jordan Hill-Lewis. The odds are stacked in his favor.
So before you go on, Zex, just something which I didn't actually finish my thought about the rates thing, and it's actually what you said, is that I think it's probably quite fun that if someone's calling you a socialist and someone's calling you like an anti-poor conservative, you're probably you're probably right. You're probably in the right because they are there. And I think most of the budget goes to these poor communities. The problem is that there's issues there which are so endemic that you can't just spend your way out of it. And they're going to require policy changes, which are actually national policy. We need a police force that can actually deal with the gangsterism. We need to deregulate and cut red tape so people can actually get jobs. And also, we need to stop corruption-enabling legislation that leads to things like construction mafias. And then that will allow high-density housing, more developments. Also, and I'm going to say something very big here, most of the people who complain about the price of Cape Town is expensive. I experienced that firsthand. But it's still fine if you go to like other good neighborhoods, but everybody wants to live in the city bowl. And the problem with the city bowl is that you're sandwiched between the mountain and the sea. Of course, it's going to be expensive. You have everybody wanting to live in a neighborhood the size of a postage stamp, with a huge proportion of it which has so much historical baggage that nobody's allowed to build on it. And so I've got articles on that. You can go on therationalstandard.com and check my articles on we need to build more housing to see that. Now, Zex, so I know there's a topic you want to discuss, so you can wrap up this topic and then move on to the next one.
Yeah, and then move on to the next one, right? That makes sense. I think, yeah, the issue of the Western Cape is interesting, and there's two possible next leaders, right? I think who is the minister in communications? I forgot to mention him when I mentioned ministers who are doing a good job. Solly Malatsi. I like everything he has been doing, at least most of the things he's been doing there, right? He's been heavily against this new tax that the SAPC and its, I guess decision makers are trying to push on us instead of a TV license, and they're saying everyone in South Africa, even if you don't have a TV or anything like that, you are supposed to pay this new household levy, as they are calling it. And he has been speaking up against that. I think he'd make an interesting candidate if he were to run, right? Because I find at least his ideological backing, his ideological anchoring to be pretty sound. So that should be pretty interesting. But it seems like Hill-Lewis is, as both of you have indicated, the one who's touted to be the next one. So yeah, it should be interesting. Should be interesting. The coming months should be nice to see, right? We usually don't see a whole lot of drama, as I said, concerning the DA. So that should give us a whole lot of topics at least to speak about here. And then to the next topic, really, to set it up, right? Because I am sure if you live on the internet, this is all you have been seeing. I know personally, right? I was thinking of like pulling my inner, Bobby Hill and doing prop comedy and actually coming with like, an actual tinfoil hats, but I was like, yeah, it was going to be too much. I don't know, maybe the reflection was going to look weird on camera, but there's that. But now it's no longer a tinfoil, conspiracy now. Like the latest tranche of like over 5 million documents of Epstein related files have been released by the Department of Justice, long over the due date, like begrudgingly released. They are way past the deadline. It was technically legal and substantively illegal what they were doing, and yeah, I don't think that they cared. They haven't released all of them, at least according to my knowledge from things that I've seen on the internet, but already what they've released has been crazy. Where do we start, right? Where do we start? I guess for us, since we usually deal in policy, we have to start at the level of the what used to be, assumed that, Jeffrey Epstein was an intelligence operative. He possibly was, an agent of the CIA, an agent of Mossad. With these new files, we we pretty much know definitively that he was heavily involved with the Israeli intelligence community, heavily involved. What questions then does that raise? Why is the Israeli intelligence community involved with someone who has pled guilty to sexual trafficking? And this was before all of this came out, right? This is going back to the 2008 conviction where he was found to have pretty much been a weird dude. Let us put it like that. I don't know where this will be posted will allow us to say all the bad words we should be describing these people as. But why is the Israeli intelligence community at least trying to ingratiate themselves to a guy as despicable as this guy? Why is most of the world's elites, right? I saw a very interesting, article on Mises.org about how the elites have been pretty much compromised in this, but why does it seem like we are stuck with them? And I think this would be an interesting place to start, right? For me, as a conspiracy nut, by the way, dating back to Pizzagate, all the way in 2016. I live in a very weird part of the internet where all of this, going back to the WikiLeaks and me waiting in my university room for WikiLeaks to release the emails and them releasing the emails and me being confused by all these references to pizza, and then also subsequently seeing all these references to pizza that are weird and like eating pizza and what type of pizza also present in the latest Epstein files. So I want to hear your thoughts, gentlemen. I'm an anarchist, I'm a libertarian. I hate power, at least the one that is state-centric, and the fact that most of these people at least have ingratiated themselves to state-centric power only reaffirms my hate of state-centric power and why we should at the very least relook how the state has been constituted, the powers that it has, and maybe just like try and find a different way to do it. But I want to hear your thoughts. I am firmly on the side of let's put them in jail. At the least, the other things I want to do to them, I cannot say out loud because I find them to be beyond despicable, right? Anyone who contacted, from Noam Chomsky to Elon Musk, who tried and failed, he's so lame. I saw a joke somewhere that Elon is so lame that not even pedophiles want to hang out with him. So that is pretty cool for him. In one instance, it's not for lack of trying. He did want to hang out with the pedophiles. That he messaged them multiple times, but they kind of maybe blew him off. Which I guess for now looks very good on his part. But yeah, man, what do you all think? Right, starting on the involvement of state entities like intelligence agencies in things as horrible as these, right? In things like the trafficking and the blackmailing of potential elites, but primarily the trafficking of young children, right? Being involved with someone who does that, and the most richest people in the world subsequently also doing that, and there being no consequences. Like no one has went to jail over this. The FBI lied. Kash Patel lied to Congress when he said that there was no, there was no prosecutions to be pursued. When we know, dating back to 2019, according to the files, there were other co-defendants who were supposed to be charged with Epstein that are now redacted. We don't know who they are, but there were people who are supposed to be charged with Epstein. And then if you look at the actual, communicator files that the FBI had, right, there are multiple leads to follow. All these people who hung out with Epstein, all these people who are mentioned in this 16-year-old girl who had a diary, who mentioned bankers, who mentioned people by names and the horrible things that they would do to her, how they would use her as an incubator, according to her, right? Assaulting her and then taking away her children, some being born still, but all these things are there in the files. And the FBI looked us directly in the eye and was like, yo, you know what? There's nothing to see here. I find that to be wild. I find the fact that Kash Patel still hasn't been arrested for perjury or anything remotely close to that is wild. I find that the fact that all these bankers, all these executives these super rich people, right, who are doing some despicable things. Bill Gates and his weirdness too, right? All of these weird people, no consequences. And it kind of has been driving me crazy. I've been functioning, but every time I think about it, I'm man, if this doesn't get humanity as a whole angry, then what will, right? It for me as a conspiracy nut, I'm like, man, everything I used to, we used to argue about on the internet and the various theories, and the FBI is like, okay, here it is, it's all true, and the world is like, okay, so bad. What's the next meme? What's the next? That is, yeah, that is a bit sad. But I want to hear your thoughts, gentlemen, so that I don't stay too long on this.
I think the big thing, just I'm not going to answer the intelligence thing first, but I want to get to it. But first, I think just to answer why this is happening, and I think that there's very much I think it's the Lord Acton quote, the power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But then there's the counter to that, which is that it's not the power corrupts, it's that power attracts the corrupt to it. And I think that people who have the desires to do things that will extremely heinous and illegal and disgusting, and they have that intense desire to do that, are probably more likely to want to work towards getting to a position where they can do those things. When you have people like, this is why I like rich people like Warren Buffett, because he didn't do anything over the top. He's literally just very patient and very conservative, and just literally just been investing since he was 11 years old. And that's why there's no damn controversy around him. Because he never screwed with the system. He literally just sat on money and just kept investing for almost for over 3/4 of a century. But then you get people like Jeffrey Epstein, who is, I watched a lot of things which didn't really answer the question of how he made his money, because he was a rich guy, but he was actually allegedly a very bad financial manager, which raises the question. This is why I think people talk about, okay, he must have been a spy, must have been a spook. It's not new for intelligence agencies from around the world to utilize organized crime as a part of their networks, because organized criminals make themselves susceptible to those types of things. They don't have the morality. They don't really care. They're not loyal to a flag, which makes them perfect agents to smuggle information, to bring in money. This is why in the Cold War, why both sides worked with terrorist organizations, both sides worked with drug smugglers and human traffickers. I think there's something very much to say that is national security worth working with monsters? And I think that's a very, very important question to ask. Especially, and I would say that no, monster implies very much. I think that maybe you can make a little bit of an argument to work with a drug smuggler, but that's also my personal views on okay, drugs, they're just this. But human trafficking, no. I think that if the CIA or any others, now I will say I was quickly looking for the links, the irrefutable links between Epstein and Mossad, because I've seen the allegations. I've seen allegations dripping with anti-Semitism and blood libels. But I was just Googling now. I would like you to send me the links, because I can't find anything besides the old stuff. And I even filtered it by articles from a month or a week ago. And I'm not finding it from any sites which I vaguely trust at all. So so you can send that to me and I can see those stuff.
The connection, right, with Epstein, because man, the Epstein files have been crazy. Epstein was a Jewish supremacist, so like a Zionist. Oh, but yeah, in the emails he was talking to people who referred to people who were not Jews in a word that I don't think I can say here. But Epstein was a Jewish supremacist. He was friends with people who were Jewish supremacists. He was friends with people who were closely tied to the intelligence agencies of the Israeli government, who have donated and given to the IDF. So yeah, but either way, he was friends with people who were Jewish supremacists. Not only that, there's also the whole, spirit cooking dimension and the things they used to do there, and like the weirdness that is also associated with. But yeah, the connection with him is that he espouses ideals, right? That's a couple of months ago, really, where people would have said these ideas are French. These ideas could never, it is anti-Semitism when you speak that there are people who are in positions of power, right, who hold certain ideas. But yeah, Epstein has even used what is this? There's this term that I saw a video someone was doing that he was using in one of the emails, WASP. He was calling white English, Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Yeah, so referring to that there will be a lot of WASPs at a particular event, and that is a term that is used to identify people, of course, who are not Jews. And then there's the actual, other name that people who were in conversation with him were calling other people who were not Jews, which I don't think is appropriate for me to say. But yeah, it may be an actual episode dedicated to us unpacking the entire files, right? Would be pretty interesting. But yeah, that is a connection. I'll send you the links though, Nicholas. I'll send you the links.
I think it'll be very hard for us to unpack the files because, yeah, you said there's over 5 million of them. And I think that's something that actually just before you have your say, something that we need to actually just keep in mind here is that there's 5 million files and they don't only contain sources directly from Epstein, directly from his personal things and his emails and his black book and all that. They also contain witness testimony, which some of them being proper victims and witnesses, which stuff which we should definitely take incredibly seriously. There's some very good documentaries about Epstein and which is made by survivors. Though there's some on Netflix, also about Ghislaine Maxwell. Very good. Watch those. I think they put things together very well. But there's also, for example, I saw something where there was an alleged witness who reported the FBI about, and some of these bizarre rituals. Now they were discussing. I read about them, and I was like, "This is beyond." I can't mention on YouTube. I don't even know if we're monetized, but it might even take the channel down if I describe them. So I'm not going to say that. But then I read the context around it, and this victim was brought in by Michael Moore, which I do not trust Michael Moore as far as I can spit, and also I do think that we do live in a world of people who constantly are grasping for relevancy or for attention. And this person didn't come back for follow-up interviews. They did not want to provide any other evidence. So I think that it might have happened, but I think that we live in a world in which we do need to actually have more than just testimony especially from people who don't even claim to be victims, to have just been in the sidelines. And I think that's why it's very important not to take everything at face value. The other thing as well, just to throw a spanner, I don't think Epstein was a Jewish supremacist. I think he was a practicing Jew as I'm a practicing Buddhist. But I add that I'm already reading like on this thing that he was apparently quite close friends. Obviously, that person's now denying this, but close friends with the president of Iran. So I think that he was a textbook sociopath. I think he didn't hold on to any values besides his own personal enrichment and his own personal perversions. I think that anything that he would have done was purely just for himself, and he would have played all sides. Ayanda, what do you think about this whole mess?
Look, gents, I'm not going to sit here and lie and pretend to know all the nitty-gritties and the details. My knowledge of this is actually peripheral. It's peripheral, and I've just heard scraps of it. But three quick points which Zakes has made, and to steal them from him. First one is the human trafficking, of course, of the young girls. I saw some of the images being circulated around. I found that very, very, very disgusting. It's very, very revolting. My second point would be the powerful people, right, whose names have been linked to him, who have had meetings with him at some point. Very, very powerful names. And that's the other thing as well, which really stood out for me. It was to say, you guys were even in contact. Never mind meeting. But
sorry, Ayanda?
you were...
Sorry, you cut out for a few seconds. Sorry about that. You can just, if you can reverse for a few seconds, that would be good, so we can hear what you have to say.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi. But my point was to, even if you guys haven't met him, like in person, you haven't met him in person, but you're you're contacting him, like you have contact with him. So what does that say about you as a person, your values and who you are? So that has raised questions around that for me as well. I find that very concerning. And just my last point on this, the guy is obviously a sociopath. There's no question about that. And for me, the fascination is, how do these kinds of sociopaths amass so much power and wealth? Because he's not the only one, right? This may not be the best comparison, but we have our own Thabo Besters right here in South Africa. How do all these guys, Aboket Matlala, how do all these guys and amass this kind of wealth in society? It's a fascination that I have. If I had a chance to go and interview some of them, be it Ket Matlala, be it Thabo, just to sit for you, just to go into your mind and really understand what makes you tick, what makes it possible for you to achieve all these things. Because we also have these discussions, right, in our red pill circles, right? Because people like Epstein, and this is crazy, I know, but in the broader manosphere, there would be people, no matter how messed up the guy was, but there would be people who admired the guy, for some reason, or liked something about him, or thought that maybe a particular trait about him allowed him to amass that kind of power and wealth in society. So I just think those are the things. It's the human trafficking thing, which I think is disgusting. I think there must be consequences for whoever was tied to that. My second point being on the sociopathic thing and how you manage to amass so much as a person. And thirdly, the famous people, the powerful people who have been linked to him, as the files have said. What should we do about them? Because for me, what I've seen and what I've heard has really deepened my mistrust of elites across the world. And it has reminded me of an article that I read by the late Rex van Schalkwyk, who was the chairman of the Rule of Law Project, where he said political processes are criminal precisely because of these things, precisely because of these dodgy relationships between powerful people and politicians.
I think you touch a very good point there, and that it's eroded your trust in elites, and I think that it can say the same for most people. For all of us who weren't already doubtful, because I think some of us were doubtful beforehand, but it definitely, ironically, I probably have been brought more towards the middle. I'm now no longer radical. Pre-2020s, pre-Epstein, I was a very radical anarchist, and now I'm, slightly more of a nihilistic, like, nations and states are going to happen, so we might as well just deal with that fact. But I think, though, that the Epstein list, and knowing how many people are connected to it, and how many the names, I saw Mick Jagger is in a photo with him. And it's that's something which actually struck me. Like, I expect Trump to be there. I think we all, unless we're really deluding ourselves, we all know Trump is a sex offender. It's a sorry, no, he may be a sex offender. I'm so sorry. He may be a sex offender, and
it's allegedly everyone, even
allegedly
though
a sex offender.
yeah.
But we know that he was at least associated with this guy. And as you said, an association is a black mark. Now, I'm pretty sure that there are some, maybe an accountant that Epstein just spoke to in passing who's maybe not completely guilty. But the fact that if you were on his island, if you took his private jet, you knew something and you weren't saying it. And I think we can all agree with that. Sorry, just trying to back myself out of being sued just made my make my train of thought. But I think that that Epstein list and knowing all these elites are corrupt, combined with the terrible response to COVID and lockdowns, I think has led to what the crisis of the 21st century that we have now. I think that, and also we could already say that it was building on the blocks of the 2008 financial crisis and Occupy Wall Street and all that. Is I think that people around the world, particularly America, and that's why we're getting those cultural wars, but everywhere now, we don't trust our leadership. We don't trust our tax money is going somewhere. I think the world is effectively caught up to what a lot of South Africans have been feeling for the last over a decade, is that our politicians do not have our best interests at heart. I think to wrap up, just to bring in the South African component to the Epstein list, because there is a South African component. Cape Town was named as one of the hunting grounds for his human trafficking, which gives a very creepy, eerie feeling. Sometimes I think we divorce ourselves from these things. We watch these true crime documentaries, and we think, no, it's only over there. But no, to know that they were probably local people that we may have walked past in the streets, or may have gone to school with, or may have gone to university, that may have been victims of this, that is very harrowing. The second thing is that, and this is not an allegation, so make it as you will, but ex-president Jacob Zuma has a connection. That apparently I think he had dinner with Epstein in London. That would be very par for the course for our ex-president, I would say. He had rape allegations against him, which I don't even think he denies. And I think that Epstein and Zuma are two very similar people. I think they just got to power in a different ways, and they got what they wanted in different ways. I actually wrote an article, and I wanted to mention this earlier, and when you were saying that when the DA used to attack and ridicule Jacob Zuma, and they called him stupid, and the media would call him stupid and all that. And I remember Jacob Zuma said that he's a political genius years ago in 2016. And people obviously ridiculed him for that because, people love to mock the way he says things. They like to mock his mathematics or whatever. And I wrote a rebuttal to them, and I say, titled, "Jacob Zuma is a political genius." The problem is people have this idea that politicians are supposed to be these virtuous statesmen who are trying to build up the country. That's not the only goal of politics. Jacob Zuma enriched his clan. He stayed out of jail. He has created immense power and wealth for his family. He won. He is a political genius. He's until such time as he's behind bars, he's continuing to prove that he's a political genius. And I think that knowing what he was doing during the struggle, that he was the torturer, he was the interrogator, knowing how his sisters operated, even Helen Zeller said, hey, face to face, this guy is incredibly likable. We know that Jacob Zuma is very much on a sociopathic spectrum. And I think that, which shows that they can be extremely charming. They don't have doubts. They, as commenter said, they don't have a conscience. So I think that he just chose to use politics to rise to get what he wants. And while Epstein used connections and used very likely blackmail. And I think that's probably also another thing just to link why intelligence agencies probably liked him, is that, and this is something that happened in the Cold War a lot, is that they would use, they would get blackmail on other politicians, so then they could use them as plants. So, for example, the Russians use this a lot. They would get a prostitute to solicit a American politician. They would then record to get some sort of dirty blackmail on them, and then the KGB would use that politician, the blackmail, to manipulate that politician to either give them state secrets or to make some sort of decision. China's doing it at the moment as well. They're very good at it, and you probably find that Epstein was, I would say, he is probably linked to every single major intelligence agency in the world because he made himself valuable. And I think that that's not necessarily an indictment on those intelligence agencies, for the particular reason that they were completely immoral and immoral to begin with. So can you even go there, become worse? They only care about bottom lines. And I think that not sociopaths, but people on the sociopathic spectrum are definitely attracted to the intelligence line of work. Not completely sociopaths. And I say that because you have to be able to believe in something to be an intelligence operative, because it's not the most lucrative line of work. But I think that if you can get someone who cares about nothing but their country, then that makes the perfect intelligence agent. When I think the Epstein, though, I think he cared only about himself. He didn't even care about Ghislaine.
That is true, but I don't know, right? Would you say Ghislaine kind of came out of this looking good? She's in a very nice prison somewhere in the United States, not in maximum security, and she's mentioned in the diary I was talking about of one of the victims that came out with this document as like possibly being someone who the victim could go to whenever she felt like some of Epstein's friends were being too rough with her or things like that. She would mention where is Ghislaine, and maybe she would understand. But man, all of this is horrible. As you said, the South African dimension is pretty interesting because we forget like these people are horrible people, right? These people are, man, these people are horrible. Which is why, to me, to Makeba's point, like, if you, like, I get pre 2008, but like if you knew who Epstein was, right, which with any like surface level research, you would have found out like this guy is implicated in the trafficking of children and like assaulting them sexually, then why would you associate yourself with them? And then when you find out, as you say, Nicholas, that like he thought that somewhere like Cape Town would be a good place to get potential victims is scary. And then to Zuma's point, right? Like in the emails he had, the like, I think Epstein and his friends even liked him because for all his faults, Mr. Zuma is pretty charismatic. So yeah, like, and I think in the emails they mentioned him because Epstein was trying to get a Russian model to try to join them at the dinner, which like the Russian model agreed and decided to join them, which is interesting to say the least. And according to the, such a great question, by the way. And it's like, I don't think can it cause much damage to Trump's rating in the US. I think there's a certain portion of the population in the United States that's not even this will get them to abandon Trump, and that is sad. That is sad. Like, you would think the whole premise of using child assault as a like modus for blackmailing is like the threat of, if this comes out then you're ruined, right? But that threat has kind of fallen away now because it has come out that these people were doing some horrible things, and it doesn't seem to have moved the needle that much, at least in hardcore Trump states. But of course, maybe if you look at the recent congressional votes in, I think, in Texas, right, in a district that Trump won nationally, but he performed pretty badly in right now, you would say, okay, maybe people are upset about this. But yeah, the fact that nothing has happened to the people implicated, the fact that the FBI redacted information of people to seemingly protect them, really, because there are victims' names that aren't redacted, but there are certain defendants or co-accused with Epstein whose names are, wholly redacted. And I'm like, that is problematic. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. It is all a saddening event for me because, like, when the documents first came out, I thought it must have been a hoax, and then I kept on seeing people I trust cover the documents. I was like, man, isn't that interesting? But yeah, as far as intelligence agencies are concerned, Nicholas, you're correct. They're all horrible, really. They're all horrible. I will still maintain, right, at least according to Epstein's lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, right? He's the one in the emails who said that if Epstein was any younger, he'd be holding a stun gun and, acting as an Israeli intelligence officer. And an FBI informant from the documents themselves who said that, like, Epstein would, after talking to someone, that person would be debriefed by the Israeli intelligence agency. And Dershowitz himself, who said that, not only is Epstein, a CIA, a domestic intelligence agent, but is also an agent of allied agencies. So to your point, that it possibly would not even be just the Israeli intelligence agencies, but like various ones, right, all across the world, the ones that consider themselves allies of the United States. But yeah, it is disheartening. I like want another hour, but unfortunately we don't have it because there's so much to it. But as the documents, as people keep on pouring through the documents, right? Because it's only been a week, I'm sure more stuff will come out, since now we've only just been doing like word searches of popular people. So yeah, hopefully as people go through them, we'll learn more about how horrible the people we claim to be leaders are.
I think it's a good place to close. My closing statement to answer the question of if this will damage Trump's ratings, I think that it's already done some damage to his internal MAGA movement. I think we can see that his little bit of his tiff with Elon Musk, as much as I think Elon Musk is probably coming from resentment, more personal resentment anyway, that he wasn't invited to the parties. But I think there are a lot of conservatives that stake their entire identities on protecting children and opposing and trying to get the Epstein list released. I think they somewhere are scumbags who are just still defending Trump and are kind of pushing it aside. But I think there's a lot more than we're giving credit who are actually saying, hey, this is not actually good. And I think this is going to destroy this has led to a rupture in the conservative movement already. which is good because conservative movement in America is completely tainted now. It needs to be a big reset. I think that the Democrats are a lame horse that need to be split up into something new, and the Republicans are not even a shadow of their former selves, so they need to be put out to pasture and replaced by something else as well. Hopefully that happens. Hopefully that happens soon before the next election. Maybe the Marcus Rubio's party will please me. He'll cross the Rubicon and deliver us victory as the new Caesar. But I think that's a good place to end it. It's funny, I think. First, I think the thing that might lead to Trump losing his ratings is actually going to be that America is still not economically good for the vast majority of the middle class and lower middle class people. Be that his fault or systemic issues, I think that's probably going to lead to a drop in his ratings more than anything else. But thank you everyone for listening to this very long and very interesting discussion. I think we'll definitely see in the coming weeks who's going to be leading the charge in the DA leadership elections. We'll see more releases from the Epstein list, especially as more and more people pour over files, hopefully being able to do a little bit more clarity over which are actually legitimate pieces of evidence and which are just any people just sending in tip-offs, which don't lead to much. Very interesting. We live in interesting times. I hope for more boring times in the future where we have nothing to discuss, but I think that's a vain hope. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Make sure to check us out next week. Subscribe, like, comment. It all helps the algorithms. And maybe to help us not be demonetized with some of the things said in this episode. Also, make sure to check us out on the X, on Facebook, and most importantly, to check out our articles at rationalstandard.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.